Welcome. Great. Welcome, everybody. All right. I think I'm going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Robert Kearns. I'm here with the Charles River Watershed Association. I'm the climate resilience specialist. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this webinar all about daylighting and restoring streams. We have two speakers today that we are really excited to have talking about two stream restorations here in the Charles River Watershed that have been done in the past few years. And we just want to welcome you. And I know it's a beautiful Friday. So we're just going to get started. Next slide. And here's our agenda. We're going to start out first with introductions of the speakers, talking about the history of the restoration at Fuller Brook in Wellesley, Massachusetts, in the Charles River Watershed. Then we will transition to talk about the restoration of the stream in the Fernald site in Waltham, Massachusetts. And then we will transition to talking about the initiatives for stream restoration here from CRWA's perspective for the watershed organization. And then we will wrap up with 15 minutes of time for questions and answers. And if folks have questions or things, you can put them in the chat as we go through the presentations, and we will take all questions and answers at the end of the presentation session, and we'll have a little panel. Next slide. So first, we wanted to acknowledge that and recognize that the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc Nations are the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, and all of the work that CRWA is on this occupied territory of these Native tribes, and we are committed to creating respectful engagements and relationships with Indigenous communities in our watershed to learn, uplift, and support their relationship with the land and the water. Next slide. So I know some of you all are familiar with our work, but if you are new to CRWA, we are one of the oldest watershed organizations in the country, founded in 1965 by a group of concerned residents, and who really had a vision for cleaning up the quality of the river. We've come a long way since the song Dirty Water, and there's still a lot of work to do, including stream restoration, dam removals, increasing public health from the sewage overflows in the lower basin, but also stormwater pollution, which is impacting our river and tributaries all across the watershed. And we really have an interdisciplinary staff with all these different program areas, and our mission is really to help protect and restore the river using science, advocacy, and the law, and promote environmental equity. So we're really excited to be talking to you all today about stream restoration. It's a really hopeful topic, a very exciting topic. And I'm going to go on the next slide. And you may be wondering, if you're not as familiar with the Charles River, you may be familiar with, the lower basin in Boston, Cambridge area, but the Charles actually flows all the way from Hopkinton, Mass, to Boston, similar to the Boston Marathon, but it's a lot longer. It's over 80 miles long. And this map here shows all of the different communities, the 35 cities and towns in the watershed, where all the rain falls on, hits the surfaces, that all gets into the river. So we just wanted to give a perspective of that. Next slide. And now I'm going to introduce our two speakers. First off, we have Brandon Schmitt. He's the director of the Wellesley Natural Resources Commission and Wellesley's elected Conservation and Park Commission. He's also on the executive board of the Massachusetts Tree Wardens and Foresters Association. Brandon is a certified arborist and municipal specialist through the International Society of Arboriculture and a graduate of the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. Also, we are joined by Bill Doyle, who's the founding president of C1.0 Engineering and Development, and has more than 30 years experience in the land planning, construction, and civil engineering, with an emphasis on site and utility design, on-site wastewater treatment, construction administration, and innovative and alternative stormwater management. He's a passionate about community involvement and has been on many boards in the city of Waltham and commissions and groups, including the Waltham Conservation Commission for over 18 years. It's great to have both of these folks here with us today to talk about their experiences working on stream restorations in two communities here in the Charles River Watershed. And first, we're going to start off with Brandon in Wellesley.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I'll just preface this with an apology. I'm sure there's hundreds of other people who have been involved in this project who are way more engaging and qualified to speak about it, but I guess they were all busy, so you're stuck with me. I have a ton of slides. This is a really cool project that we have a lot of stuff, so I'm going to try to fly through it. Hope to answer any questions, and I'm assuming that the slides can be provided after the presentation. Oops. There we go. Okay, so Fuller Brook Park is in Wellesley, Massachusetts. The Fuller Brook, as well as the upper portion called Caroline Brook, are part of the Fuller Brook subbasin. It's the town's second largest watershed by area, but densest in terms of properties that contribute to it. The Fuller Brook Park is 2.5 miles long, and it encompasses 25 acres with approximately 120 direct abutters. The watershed itself is 3.2 square miles, or roughly 2,000 acres. Just a quick outline. I want to go over some of the project history, the goals, which include trails, pathways, ensuring the historic features are maintained, and then the meat of this presentation is the stream restoration. So the park was first established in 1899 and finally completed in 1930s. From its infancy, it was a multi-use park created to drain water from the surrounding lands and provide parkland and transportation. Along with the town's engineers, they worked with consultants, including John Charles Olmsted from the Olmsted firm, Warren Manning, and Ernest Bowditch. Back my paperwork here. These are just some historic photos of the original land. You can see low-lying, and then this typical armored bank that you can see, and this would have been mown down to the stream edge. Again, really looking at it from that perspective, it was just a stormwater conveyance. The park, with the exception of the circle in the middle, is on the historic register. Due to the firms that were involved and the park design from Olmsted in the 1900s. This area was considered too disturbed. It includes our high school track and field, as well as a series of other athletic fields, and the stream is actually still culverted until it reaches a pond here. I don't expect anyone to read this, but the restoration project was initiated in 2003 and through a series of Community Preservation Act funding and town meeting action, ended up going through 10 years of permitting, was finally permitted and designed in 2013, and construction began right as I came on to staff here in Wellesley in 2014. The park was completed in 2017. And at this, I just want to acknowledge that due to the multidisciplinary nature of this project, the town meeting formed what was called the Fuller Brook Park Coordinating Committee. So this was an appointed board by the moderator, and hours and hours of work went into that from those volunteers to make this possible. I'll just mention the final price tag. I think that was funded was about $5.5 million. Grants were able to bring that cost down, but that's just giving you an idea of what it cost. The project goals were to improve the pathways, improve vegetation, maintain the historic features, and improve the drainage in the stream course. First up, the trails. I'll just go through some pictures here. You can see there was a series of these informal trails. They were not accessible, low-lying areas that were under the water table that would pool, just making it very hard to pass. This is actually a picture of the restoration. As part of this project, there was a demonstration path that was created to allow the residents to see various options and ultimately on the width and the material. And they, the contractor, after using a bobcat for a while, came with a paving machine to actually use the stone dust. So their ingenuity kind of led to this. But again, pervious pavement because we're working right next to a stream, but it had to be firm and stable footing to meet ADA requirements. In very low-lying areas where there's wetlands, they build raised boardwalks. They also included many of the street crossings were not marked, the curbs were not cut, so that was all part of the project as well. One of the unintended consequences is that now that more and more people are using it, we're dealing with policy discussions about how do we deal with mixed pedestrian use of it with bikes, and now with e-bikes, how are we going to regulate that? So that's a consideration. We included new wayfinding signage for the park, new access, all the kind of perpendicular access points from various neighborhoods. And then there's a series of bridges that were kind of added on after the fact that we said, while we're in here doing work, we might as well replace these bridges that cross the brook. I'll talk more about this. This is a bioretention garden, and 2 educational signs were installed as well. So vegetation management, as I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with, we have invasive species, and we're still dealing with those. Primarily Japanese knotweed, Norway maples, bittersweet, ailing and injured trees, and of course we wanted to add new plant material. So first up, these are mats that were installed to cover knotweed, essentially sterilize knotweed. Now, these are still in place 6 years later. We're not really sure what to do about this, but we did put in our capital budget this year a small request to do a test plot and see what happens. So we're working with a consultant who is going to come and do the actual physical maintenance of this when we pull it up. We suspect the knotweed will still be there and be more than happy to grow back, but there's a series of these mats. They're not popular, but they are effectively, they're keeping the knotweed at bay at this point. Here's another picture, just kind of giving you an idea with the core fabric on one side, the stream construction, and then the knotweed on the other. Hydro-seeded a lot of the areas adjacent to the path, and then you can see someone down here removing knotweed. Same thing, we tried to preserve some trees, and we have seen knotweed popping up here. Again, 6 years later, you know, it's still there. It's just going to wait. Some of the trees we were able to preserve, like this one, was popular, so they dug it up and relocated. Here's some new vegetation, trees, shrubs along the banks. This is one of my favorite areas of the park. It's a low-lying area, and on to the right, you can't see it. There's a raised boardwalk, a short section, and then this is a wet meadow that they planted with wildflowers. How am I doing on time? Good. Yeah, final slide about vegetation. Take it from this, turn it into this. You know, this is clearly a manicured area of the park, but there are still wild areas, and they've gone through and done their best to get rid of invasive species. We do have a contract with a landscape professional company who comes back every year. That's, you know, the budget that was cut included a lot of resources for invasive species management. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that if we were to remove every Norway maple in the park, there would be no trees left. It would completely change the character of the park. So that was part of it, and then other budgetary considerations. But the NRC has made annual requests to bring someone on, and they provide, 1 day a week they will come out, and slowly they are eradicating and keeping it manageable with the invasive species. Okay, so stream restoration. I have here invasive plants, erosion control, bank stabilization, and then you saw the old streamliners, the concrete liners, wanted to renaturalize it. It's a very flashy stream. It's small, and in a big rain event, it does get flashy. So we wanted to kind of slow it down, provide habitat, prevent flooding. This is a picture where one of the bridges is flooded. I don't know exactly when this was, but this was one major storm event that really flooded over the banks and including the bridges. You can see the culverts. There's a little one here and a big one here. Most of the culverts throughout the stream were replaced, resized, and these head walls here were replaced. In order to construct sections of the stream, they would have to essentially take them offline, run them through pipes, 150 feet at a time, by using pumps and hoses. Here you can see sediment deposition. So this was a big thing, recarving the base of the stream. This is an artist rendering of removing these concrete liners, replacing them. Here is the actual construction, taking these concrete pieces out. Again, we gained 3 or 4 feet width at this location. These revetment walls they built wherever there was kind of a hard curve, stabilizing that. Rock veins are these rocks that they put in to add oxygen to the water, provide habitat. I just put this on. This is a specification. So some of the walls and the core fabric, we would use live stakes, so planting dogwoods. Those are really pretty now. Here's another section where it's a narrow section, but it includes that rock vein, new native vegetation, reconstructed banks. This is the specification for what's called a root wad. So they would remove mature trees, typically your Norway maples, and then shove them into the bank. And this is really what's stabilizing the bank with the flow of the water going from left to right in the picture. And then so it provides additional habitat here, additional agitation to add oxygen. And here they are in action. At first, people didn't really like them because they thought, why did they leave that ugly stump? But now they're completely blended in, and they really do a great job without bringing in, less natural material. Additional landscaping. They put this wall here because you have an inlet coming from the left. Again, we have a slight curve here, so we're building this revetment wall. This is where the velocity of the stream's coming in. Still good on time. More pictures during construction. Rock veins, bypassing the stream here, dewatering it. They had to be careful with the fish migration and time of year. They created this meandering stream. It looks really nice. All of these are looking from Forest Street west, if anyone's interested. Okay, so the bioretention basin, this was a really neat feature that they were able to include 2 of these. And so these are just areas that they dug a depression they're really engineered to accept stormwater at a certain rate and then slowly drain, and they are filled with native plants. So this was funded by an EPA grant for the total project cost for these was about $561,000, and the EPA kicked in $337,000. So we were able to take advantage of some grants, and these are really a neat feature of the park. But you can tell they look natural, but they're highly constructed features of the park. There's plant material going in. And this is kind of what they look like now. So there's a chamber on either side where water comes in, slowly fills in. These plants take up nutrients, absorb water, decontaminate the water to some degree, and then eventually, if there's overflow, it goes back out and back into the stream. This is what it looks like now. I just included this picture to show you kind of the range of plants that were included in that bioretention area. Quite a large palette of plants. In addition to the stream restoration, there is a pond that I pointed to on the previous slide. And again, thinking while we're in here, why don't we dredge this pond? And so you can see this poor guy stuck waist deep in this muck. And so they built a little bridge with a filter and reached over from land into the pond, and we're able to dredge that, again, adding to the environmental value of the entire project. And this is the view of that pond. One feature that we're still dealing with is this area is called the flume, and no one in town, at least that I know, has a real clear picture of what this is actually for. But it does present a barrier for fish migration. So we have white suckers that travel here. We've had staff from the Fish and Wildlife Service come and think about a design using sandbags. But people like this feature. It's a waterfall. It has the sound. It's a highly visible area of the park. But it is an area where you go down there and you really see the fish struggling. Actually, I've been down there and seen 1 out of every 50 attempt make it over. So this is something that we want to continue to think about, how we can improve fish passage here. But for the time being, the residents are happy to get their nets and buckets and help the fish up. So I'll stop there. I don't know. It looks like we don't have much time for questions now, but I'm happy to take those at the end. And my contact information is here. Please reach out if anyone has any questions or anything else. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon. That was an amazing presentation, and I loved all the pictures. I think others also, and I definitely am writing some questions down as well. We have some in the chat, so we look forward to that panel in the future. Next up, we got Bill Doyle from Waltham. Bill, great to see you, and thank you so much.
Hi, yes, welcome. Thank you for having me, Brandon. That was amazing. Quite a project there. I know exactly where that is now. I hadn't looked at before to see what you were working on, but that is a significant project and a significant improvement. My share screen, I'm ready to go, so I think I am. There we go. So what we worked on over here in Waltham is a property. It's at the Fernald Old Mental Health Hospital, the northeast side of Waltham. Historically, back pre 1900s is when the campus actually started out here as actual a campus with buildings and everything. But prior to that, obviously, it was completely wooded, completely wet, not completely wet, but wet streams and everything. This project is not as significant, not as large as Brandon's project, in that this project was all said and done for the creation of the stream was about under $500,000 to create it. The property is, like I said, in northeast Waltham. The entirety of the campus is about, which is the red blobbed area, is about 200 acres. It was state owned. This area and the surrounding areas drain into the Beaver Brook. If anyone's familiar with between Belmont and Waltham and up in this area, there is the Beaver Brook, which has got some really nice places that are accessible to the public, and then some other places that are just completely in the woods. This whole lot that you see outlined here, Trapello Road, Forest Street, Beaver Street, it's this basically, it's very institutional use. The institutions are Bentley, the Girl Scouts. What you see in that upper point there, in that it looks like trailers or something. That is the old Army Corps property, which has since probably 15 or 20 years ago been turned into turf fields. So there has been some change through here, but this is a kind of a historic photo of this. My kind of interest in this property, I live in Waltham on the Waltham Conservation Commission, but I've been involved with pretty much all of the state hospitals in Massachusetts and their decommissioning of them. This hospital and Medfield, I think, were some of the last two to get decommissioned. My involvement with all of those projects was as a private consultant working with the DCAN, Division of Capital Asset Management, to evaluate the properties, determine the value of the properties, what's on there for buildings, what's on there for utilities, and create these reports that basically said, this is what's here and this is what can be done with them. So when it came time to looking at Waltham, I was very interested. I did do some work on this project as a private consultant before Waltham had even bought it. So I was intimately knew, what the property had going for it. And this again is more of a historical photo before we did anything. And I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but the area we'll be talking about is in the upper, if you follow the blue lines, that's the whole Fernald property. The upper kind of peninsula here is basically what we'll be talking about, and where this stream was will be created through the presentation. So what we knew on the property, we had a pretty good idea of what the infrastructure was. We knew what the wetlands and what streams and rivers were through there. We knew this area of town, especially in Beaver Brook, experienced some flashy, call it flashy or call it flooding. I guess flooding is just a large flash. So we knew we had some problems up in this neighborhood of town. We knew the property was mostly open space in that it was fields and woods, but there obviously, as you can see from the graphic, there's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of buildings, a lot of roads. It was also state operated and maintained. So Waltham basically had no control over this as it existed for the past 150 years. So we really didn't have a sense of what was, how the property functioned, drainage wise, sewage wise, or anything. We did have a sense that there might be some contaminants in the soils and on the ground. So what are we going to do with, all that as eventually Waltham purchase it? And that's essentially what happened. The city of Waltham utilized CPA dollars and city tax dollars to purchase the property. And if you can kind of see on the plan, there's kind of a blue line that bisects there's 1/3 of the property in the bottom, and then there's like 2/3. Actually, it's more 1/4 and 3/4, in which the top portion of the property was bought with CPA money, which carries certain restrictions to it from here and forever. And then the bottom 1/3 or 1/4 here was bought with city tax dollars, which enables a little more freedom, a little less restriction from the what CPA dollars were. CPA is Community Preservation Act, initiated by the state to provide and allow for towns to provide money to things that would preserve the town's character, natural resources, and such. So that's kind of what we know. Then the ideas. So when you have 200 acres, within the 128-95 belt, everybody's going to have an idea of what to do with it. I won't say it's pristine acreage, but it definitely is clear, undeveloped for the most part, land that would have a high value to it. So what we did see is, a lot of ideas coming from everywhere. The group, how I got involved with this as a resident of Waltham, was through the Fernal Working Group, which was basically a group of residents in town. And I, if you guys are interested, or if there's a lot more information than I'll have in this presentation, better pictures, better graphics and everything, you can see that website on there, fernalworkinggroup.org. You can go check that out. There's tons of information there. But they dragged me into a room one night in the basement of some building. There was 3 or 4 of us. And on the wall, there was a kind of a graphic. And I hadn't met half the people in the room yet. There's probably, it was probably 6 or 8 of us in the room. And I'm looking at the graphic on the wall as an engineer, and I'm saying, wow, there's a stream that needs to go through here. And that's essentially what it was. But as we were going, as I was involved with the Fernal Working Group and all of the, not just the 6 or 8 people in the room, but the hundreds of people that came out to different design charrettes and everything, we generated, a bunch of different plans. This is just an example of one of them. But when you listen to the community and the town areas, you hear all the different ideas: parks, housing, municipal offices. We needed master planning. What are the natural resources on the property? We see there's a lot of blue on this property. What does this mean for water quality? What does it mean for flooding up here? Because everyone knows there's flooding in the area in some of the smaller streams. And then we started to hear more ideas of connectivity and amenities and outreach. And the stream really came out. If you can see the stream in the middle of the property, it didn't exist at the time of this picture, but we started to see that this was going to be very important. It partially existed before all of this, but it definitely needed to exist in the future. What it does, what it has done, what it will do when the property is finally opened up and everyone's allowed to get in here, is it will provide this amenity. It will provide connectivity. It will provide conservation. It does now today provide flood mitigation and water quality. And we'll see a little bit of that. But just something to note, on the bottom of the page, you see it's November 2009. This is about 5 years or so after we started really kind of saying, oh, we're going to buy this property and, we can do something with it. So this is 2009, where we actually have some pretty good ideas as to what happens here. So where do we start? How do we look at creating this stream? Well, the first map in the middle of the page here is from 1903. And as you can see, if you look at the roadways, you see that kind of peninsula up in the top here. That's the peninsula that existed on the previous graphics. You see this stream that comes down. And all that blue we saw in the bottom is these streams down in the bottom here. This is 1903. The second graphic to the right is 1950. You still see that same peninsula. You still see the same stream coming down, and you start to see a pond where the wetland is on this page. But then you also start to see the Fernald School starting to grow. Initially, it was just a couple of buildings, and then it starts to grow. So what do we build now in the future? We just go back to what was there before, which is essentially what we did, which may be why the design costs and everything weren't so high, because it was easy to kind of recreate what was there once we understood what was there. But we had to discontinue utilities, demolish buildings, clean up the land. And the biggest thing we needed to do is really build a consensus. I don't want to say it's political, but it was just getting everybody on the same page. And what we ended up doing is we kind of got the green light. A couple of us in the Fernal Working Group got the green light to say, well, if you were to fix this, if you were to get a stream back here, what would it be? So literally me and one other, Diana Young from the Fernal Working Group, we got together one day in the public library. We sat down and we just drafted up what an RFP for this would look like, to get an engineer out here to design what should be here. And that's what you see on the right, on the left, the cover page of that RFP that we pulled together. in 2014. So 5 years after we had done some planning, and that was 5 years after we had, had looked at, at purchasing the property. On the right is the actual plans that were developed, and you notice the date on that, 2019. So this is not for the faint of heart. It's not for the impatient to do these things. And again, I don't want to say it's politics, but it's more consensus building. And this path of getting a bunch of us getting to this RFP and getting it turned into what essentially became the design plans for it took all of the consensus. So this just zooms in a little bit, and the portion that we're talking is in the upper right-hand corner here. And I won't get into all the hydrology, and I wanted to keep it kind of quick because I know question and answer will be fun on both this and what Brandon has. But I did want to show that this upper kind of loop road is what it was 5 years, 5 years ago. We demolished the buildings under separate contract. They had to go. They were dangerous. They were condemned. Those all had to go. So that wasn't part of our $500,000 budget or sub $500,000 budget on this. But we needed to create our stream. We knew it was going to be an incubator. We knew it was going to be a sequesterer. That's a word. We knew it was going to provide flood control. We knew it was going to be an amenity, the resource conservation connection and habitat. We knew it was going to be all that. But that upper right-hand corner is what we had before we started. And this is what we get. I just zoom right into it. We'll get just a bunch of photos right here. And there was design plans, but we didn't need to get too heavy into it. There was just really get rid of the buildings and get rid of the dirt that was put in place and let the water kind of do what it does. And there's the core logs, there's the embankments, and there's all these other details. But in my opinion, showing a bunch of pictures of what it looked like from that to this is what it looks like today. We have a stream coming in. You see it from the right. We did build a pond because we recognized that there was a pond there before. And as we were digging, we could see old foundations. We could see old fill material. We could see a lot of garbage that we didn't know we were going to hit. But then we found the old peat. We found the old organic soils and trees and stumps and everything that was there from the wetlands that existed. We created this from what you saw 3 slides back. And most of this, we did have design plans. And I don't want to say they were great design plans, but really it was the artistic nature of the contractors out there with the J hooks and with the armored embankments that were completely done with all natural stone found on site. And we created this. These are obviously little footprints of raccoons and everything. And this was finished. This is the stream channel as it comes down. This was built last spring, and these are midsummer last year. And as we all know, it was a pretty dry summer, so this didn't, it survived. It works great today. As you go out there today, you can see water flowing. But that's what we created. The design of it was basically what was there before, and contractors. It was really what the contractors were able to do with their art, with their artistry, and be able to create. It's a phenomenal area. If you can remember back at those 3 or 4 slides to all those buildings that were in that area, this is what it looks like today. The interesting part of it all right now, the fun part maybe, is that most of the people in Waltham, you're probably the group on this phone call right now, 50 or 60 of us, probably tripled the amount of people that know that this is there. Hopefully soon we'll be able to unveil it and get walking trails and everything else through here. But with that, I will relinquish control, and we'll ask questions and go from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. We got one more speaker. We got Lisa Kumpf from CRWA. My colleague is going to talk a little bit about some of the other streams that our organization is looking at for restoration. So I'll pass it off to Lisa for a little bit, and then we'll go to a group panel all three folks to Q&A. Lisa.
Thanks, Robert, and thank you so much, Brandon and Bill. Those were really interesting summaries of projects, and you can see how long they take and how much cooperation is involved in making all of that happen. So I just wanted to give a preview of 3 stream restoration projects that CRWA is beginning to undertake. They're all in different stages of development, and some are on different scales. So just to give a preview, and these are historic maps, as Bill pointed out, going back to see what it used to be historically is really important in figuring out what we're going to restore to in the future. So next slide, please. So our first project we're looking to work at is Canterbury Brook. This is a local project, and it's really just in the conception stage. It's the only daylit portion of the Stony Brook Watershed, which is a 10 square mile watershed in Boston. So it's a massive area and is highly developed, but a section of that daylit stream runs through Mass Audubon's Boston Nature Center on what used to be the old Boston State Hospital property. So definitely some connection here with the Fernald site as well. This site is located in an environmental justice neighborhood, and it's really a great opportunity for a stream restoration demonstration project in an urban area to increase the awareness that there are all of these culverted streams underneath our feet that we never think about. The project would try to address some of the same issues that were happening in the other restoration projects we just heard about. Flood mitigation, in this case, reestablishing a connection to this wetland that is right next to the stream, but the connection has been cut off. You can see the picture of that here, and to improve water quality and habitat as well. Next slide. The next project that we have are a little bit further on is another local project in Newton. We finished a visioning process with the neighborhood and with the city in 2020. And we want to move this project towards implementation now. So what is proposed is some bank restoration, increased sinuosity. So this project site has a lot in common with those kind of pre-pictures of the Fuller Brook site. It is basically a drainage ditch with grass swales on the side of it. And so there are a lot of the same problems of flashy flooding and just poor habitat. And so these different propositions, bank restoration, increased sinuosity, bioretention areas, there's a tributary going into it that can be daylit potentially, and then a rock vein at the Charles confluence to have more fish passage as well. And this is all right in a very urban, or a very trafficky area of Newton, where there is a lot of pedestrian and bike and car traffic. And one big difference between this site and the Fuller Brook site is that this was not in a historic park. This is directly in between 2 roads. So that complicates the project more. But we're looking to, in the next few years, incorporate parts of this visionary plan into the city development and transportation plans so that these can be, features of this plan can be incorporated and maybe done at different parts of time, because altogether it would be an extremely expensive and robust project. But if we section it into bits, it can be more manageable. Next slide. And then finally, our most ambitious is, and the most history, is the Muddy River in Boston. You're probably familiar, but this is the most polluted tributary in the Charles River Watershed, receiving a D- to C- grade every year in terms of its recreational health. It has already undergone major restoration project that is 23 years in the making now. That's mainly facilitated by the Army Corps along the Emerald Necklace, which of course is a important historic Olmsted Park running through the heart of Boston. And for the past 20 years, CRWA has served on the maintenance and oversight committee of this big restoration project. But the problem is that water quality is still impaired. And as an organization that focuses on that, this is a really big challenge. So our next steps here, we are hoping to lead a multi-stakeholder engagement process in this large, very densely developed watershed to focus on that water quality and how to improve it over the next 50 to 100 years. So we're both planning on a large scale, a highly densely populated scale, and also a long time scale in the case of this project. All right, those are kind of previews of what CRWA has up, but I will let you guys get to your fantastic questions for Brandon and for Bill.
So thank you, Lisa. So we have a couple questions in the chat. I wrote a couple questions down too. First question I see is from Cornelia. And the question is, some of our stream is under pavement or concrete owned by private developers or private property. Did you encounter privately owned land in your projects? If so, how did you handle that?
Brandon, that's you. Ours was all on public land. So
yeah, ours as well. So
Okay.
there are direct abutters, and it involved an extensive survey of the entire park, but all of the work took place on public land.
I can, to somewhat degree, answer that question, not necessarily with our project, but with other projects in town that we have. Again, I'm on the Conservation Commission, and a lot of our rivers and streams, the Beaver Brook included, which is tributary from to ours, is that a lot of that stream is on private property. And when there are log jams or collapsed culverts or whatever on those private properties, they do become the requirement of the property owner to fix them, get them, stop them from constricting the stream. But there is some ability for the municipality to come in and say, look, it's causing a flooding situation, and kind of force the issue. But ultimately, the way in these, quasi stream drainage things that we have, especially in these urbanized cities, urbanized, towns and stuff, is there is a responsibility to keep these things clear. How does that happen when it's on private property? Or how do we do these restorations when they're on private property? Oftentimes it's going to be done through easement agreements, and it's really a negotiation with the property owner to say, look, we've got to keep this clean. You've got to keep this clean. Give the city an easement and let us manage it. And it's tough sometimes to get to that point.
And kind of going off what Bill was saying, in my personal life, in my hometown of Braintree, in the neighboring town of Weymouth on the South Shore, they did a project on the Schmitt Brook, which is very urbanized, sort of a village center area. You can go down there. It's off the commuter rail, but also MBTA buses, and you can drive down there. If you're familiar with Weymouth Landing, East Braintree may not be. It's outside of Charles River Watershed, but they did just exactly what Bill was describing, had an easement agreement with some developers for, building a redevelopment in that area. They got some funding from MassWorks grants to do a daylighting in that urbanized section of the Schmitt Brook, which is, historic stream, and there's actually migratory smelts or sea run fish that come up every spring and spawn in that area. And it's a great little pocket park. And I know City of Quincy also has said similar projects, I believe, working with private property owners, moving streams and things. So there are opportunities and things in other places that have done that sort of work. And it's definitely something that we're keeping abreast of for all of our projects at CRWA. But yeah, very interesting. Be interesting to hear, Cornelia, where your stream is. Next question we have is from Catherine Lang, and it is, what is a rock vein? Brandon, you want to start off with that? Or I can.
Sure. Let me. Essentially, it's a series of rocks that run either directly perpendicular to the flow of the stream or at an angle, and it's an opportunity that to add agitation to the water. It serves as a barrier to slow it down, and then also an opportunity where oxygen is added to the water, if that makes sense. So just a series of rocks that go across the stream.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. I've also heard of it described, and this may be different. I'm not an engineer, but I've heard pool and riffle construction for some dam removals and things.
Yes.
You have a elevation change and you want to have a weir or a form of dam or some like the flume example, and you want to have the fish or wildlife be able to get upstream. That's another example I've heard, but just a different term for the same type of thing.
Correct.
Thank you. I had a question, and if folks send questions, let me know. You can keep putting them in the chat to me. If I miss anyone, let me know. But I know some of you, Brandon mentioned some wildlife, but what sort of critters are you guys seeing in your streams? A lot of people get scared sometimes, with the changes, and I've heard after a lot of these restorations, the critters come right back. And I don't know if you've seen critters there. I know you mentioned the white sucker, but what sort of wildlife have you seen in these restored stream areas?
So with Infernald, there was no stream where we put that stream. You saw all the buildings that were there. There was nothing there. I mean, 100 years ago there was, but nothing in recent history. But what was there, which was out of the picture, was above it was an impounded area, which was probably a wetland 100 years ago that turned into a pond. And then from there, it was all piped out. So there was a bottleneck there, and the pipe had collapsed and everything. So a pond was created up there. So you had everything you'd normally see: frogs, all kinds of different fish. The species up there were probably God only knows what, because it was such a contrived thing. Once, almost the week after we created the stream channel and created that large pond you saw, they opened up the water and let it go through, because they were bypassing it. Let it go through. The pond filled up, and within a week of the pond being full, you'd walk along the bank and frogs would be jumping in the water, because they lived up top already. So they just spread out. And then you saw the footprints and everything. So obviously the raccoons and the foxes and everything said, hey, there's frogs over here. So we started seeing that. And in that area alone, there's the deer and the coyote and the turkeys and everything else that were up there, as natural. But now they're all thriving because there's more water. There's more access to the tadpoles and everything else that's in there. It's been open and online for not even a year yet. I don't know what kind of fish that are in there, but I do suspect there are some.
Thanks, Bill. Brandon?
Yeah, same for us. I think there was some concern that the diadromous fish would not return, or they would be impacted. But as I mentioned with that one feature, the flume, that's a difficult passage, but they've been back annually since the project was done. We see the macroinvertebrates. There's beavers in the area, and they come to that pond, and I think there's a beaver lodge right there. So we do have to manage that to some degree, but yeah, your typical, some waterfowl. We get snapping turtles, and then all the amphibians that you might expect around here.
So thank you both. Very exciting that it's coming back right as it happens. Oh, next question.
Just on that, Brandon did mention the waterfowl, and we're always talking about geese, and that was a big concern, that there'd be a lot of geese out here, but there's a lot of coyote too. So it kind of keeps that in check, or at least that's our experience for the past little bit.
Good. I don't know if you guys saw, there was, just an aside, Watertown has a dog that they have now.
Yep.
I don't know if you saw that. Good, cool video in Watertown. All right, next question. Did you have to deal with contaminated lands in this restoration? And was that any part of your projects that can be parts of some projects, but was that something you had to deal with, contaminated soil or sediments?
Yeah, so for Fernald, well, typically when you're doing stream restoration work like this, you're removing it. I've done a lot of dam removal in my private, my private practice. And there's two kinds of contaminants you end up dealing with: the sediments behind the dam, the heavy metals that settle into the soils behind the dam. We didn't have that because we really didn't have a pond there. What we were faced with was the other kind, which was the fill material that was put on there. And when the buildings were taken down under a separate contract, again, they had to go. A lot of that was mitigated at that point. So it was taken out prior to this project. So when I say that $500,000 number, it didn't include that. But when you're in an urban, I would consider where our stream and pond ended up, that was fairly urbanized with the infrastructure that was there. Yes, absolutely. And that was up to the demo contractor and everyone beforehand to get all those out. When we got into the ground, there were pockets, there were basement foundations, there were some, some hot materials, but it wasn't much. It was negligible, again, because the building demolition took that away to begin with. But it's definitely there. And anytime I imagine Brandon will have a similar story, but in the riverside.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any hazardous removal. We were able to take the dredged material, particularly from the pond, to a normal landfill. So I'm not aware of that. But certainly that was part of the permitting, was that all that material had to be tested, and thankfully it tested on the non-hazardous waste side of things.
Awesome.
That's great.
Cornelia mentioned that projects Elizabeth Brook and Newport. So infancy, very good luck with your project there. The other question I had was, with rebuilding the culverts, and I know both you all had the culverts with the pipes issues in the restoration, and has maintenance for the DPW been easier with the new restored, larger culverts and things? I know sometimes the small ones get plugged up. I don't know if there's been any discussion with DPW or other maintenance folks.
That's a great question. I think it has been a trade-off to some degree. I believe the culverts have been much easier to maintain. There are certain areas where I think because they've been enlarged, maybe it has created some, I know there's been some issues with the catch basins on the street that were installed, and so maybe they were undersized, or they're not quite compatible with the new culverts. So there are like pockets where you'll see some overland flooding that we're dealing with. But I think the trade-off has been, for instance, the bioretention area requires more maintenance. So maybe where they have less on the culvert side, now they have more with that area, both for the plant maintenance and the actual maintenance of the structure itself.
For ours, Brandon's definitely, Wellesley definitely going through an urban center there. Ours, again, is in the middle of nowhere. There is no, hard, fast, when we approved this with the Conservation Commission, there's an operation and maintenance plan of it. But it used to be pipes and catch basins and all kinds of things as it went through that kind of, village that you saw there. And now it's nothing. And it's almost to the point of right now, it's like if there's a big log or something across the stream, or if the beavers come in and start doing their thing, yeah, we'll have to do that. But the design seems to be working fairly well, that it's going to find the maintenance of it will self-maintain, almost like self-healing. And it will find its own sinuosity in it. It will find its own with some limitation. We don't want to go going wild, but the design of it, the construction of it will kind of maintain itself. Will be challenged, I'm sure, in the future with different maintenance. We did create that large pond. We'll see how quick the eutrophication happens and what we need to do in there for dredging. But I think to answer the question is what is the maintenance? There's probably 1/10 of the maintenance that we were looking at before, because it's a natural process now that Mother Nature's going to hopefully take care of mostly.
So thank you both. And I see we're now at 1 o'clock. So I want to, I've gone through all the questions I got. So just want to say thank you everybody for coming to this webinar. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us at charles@crwa.org. Please stay connected with us on social media. You have our emails up there, and please sign up for the River Current, our newsletter, so you can get abreast of all of the upcoming events and things. It's spring's a very exciting time. A lot of events coming up. So stay tuned and stay engaged. And thank you all for coming.